This is a reading from the Holy Shroud and the Visions of Maria Valtorta. Jesus' height. Only one fruit makes gods of you, O human beings, the one that hangs from the cross, from my cross. Only one says to your minds, Epheta, open up, Christ. Only one thing makes the mystical ground of your hearts fertile, so that the seed may sprout there, my blood. Only one sun warms up the ears of grain of eternal life and makes them grow in you, love. Only one form of learning, like a plowshare, opens and tills your soil and enables it to receive seed, my learning. Only one master, I, the Christ. Come to me if you want to be trained in the truth. Jesus speaking to Maria Valtorta in I Quaderni del 43, page 422. Jesus' height. Whoever looks at the life-size shroud is struck by Christ's imposing figure. How tall was Jesus? Christians of all times have wondered, especially those of the 6th century. These, obviously referring to the shroud which was in Jerusalem at the time, established that Jesus' height was 1.8 meters, or 5 foot 10.9 inches. Around the 15th century, more research yielded a height of 1.82 meters, or 511.6 inches. Modern anthropologists and doctors, going by different interpretive criteria, have come to discordant conclusions. Barbet says that the shroud's imprint as a whole displays the elegant, strong, perfectly well-proportioned anatomy of a man who was about 1.8 meters tall, or 5 foot 10.9 inches. Vignon holds the same view. Guerra holds that Christ's height would have been about 1.83 meters, or 6 feet. Judica Cordelia thinks it was 1.81 meters, or 5 foot 11.2 inches, for this reason. That measurement, among other things, abides by the artistic canon according to which the height of a normal man is 8 heads, to wit, 8 times the distance between the top of the head and the lower end of the chin, measuring along the median line of the face. Professor Hynek says 183 centimeters, or 6 feet, and upholds that all doctors agree on the following opinion. The shroud bears the imprints of a man deceased in the full development of his strength. A tall, handsome man with both his bone structure and muscular system perfectly shaped. Monsignor G. Ricci, however, came to the disconcerting conclusion that Jesus would have measured 1.62 meters, or 5 foot 3.8 inches. This research of his might compel the experts to a more thorough examination of the anthropometric calculations on the man of the shroud. It is known, however, that the American syndenologists also, with their modern equipment, have ascertained that the shroud shows the figure of a fairly tall man of 1.77 meters, 5 foot 9.7 inches. Regarding Monsignor Ricci's opinion, Judica Cordelia said, "Those results have raised discussions with approvals and disapprovals. We think that Jesus' body could not have been otherwise than a work of infallible workmanship, perfect and harmonious in bodily architecture, without the least flaw or least mistake. It was, after all, the work of the Father, opus patris. It could not have been different from the Christ of the shroud, as results from our anthropometric research, from the Christ that we can read between the lines in the writings both of the evangelists and age-old tradition. He was a Son of Man, Son in the absolute meaning of the word, and a man biotypologically perfect like the first Adam, so that human nature never has been nor could ever be what it was in those two persons." Dante, PAR 8, page 82. Maria Valtorta, in her writings, does not give us Jesus' exact height, but she does give us an idea. She says, in accord with Christian tradition and a great number of modern authors, that he was tall, taller than everyone he encountered on his way to trial after being captured in Gethsemane, and stood out from everyone at the wedding in Cana by his appearance and by his height. I do not wish to discuss the merits of this vexed question. I will limit myself to respond to a few objections made by those who maintain that Jesus was short. They say, if Jesus towered above the others, Judas would have no need to point him out to the thugs with a kiss. But it was nighttime, in a wood, in the uncertain light of torches. Besides, Jesus' cousins of the same race, descendants of David, were probably as tall as he was. Again, if Jesus towered above the others, Zacchaeus need not climb a tree to see him, but could have simply backed off from the crowd a little. This objection does not stand. The gospel clearly says that Zacchaeus was short. Therefore, it is not absolutely certain that he could have seen Jesus, who was thronged by the crowd in a town square rather smaller than St. Peter's in Rome. Also, one should bear in mind that Jesus, though tall, could have been taller than the others by no more than about 20 centimeters, or 8 inches. He would not have stood out like a palm tree in the desert. Poor Zacchaeus, shorter than average, had no resort but to clamber up a tree, and good for him that he was able to. Let me add 2 reflections. 1. Some say that the Hebrews' average height in Jesus' time varied between 150 and 160 centimeters, 4'11" to 5'3". But obviously people could be taller or shorter than that. An example of short people was Zacchaeus. An example of tall people is a Hebrew crucified about AD 70, whose well-preserved bones were found in June 1968 in the burial cave of Givhat HaMitwah. Professor Niku Haas of the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, after some very careful and arduous research, was able to establish his age, 24 to 28 years old, and his height, which was about 170 centimeters, or 5'7". To us Christians who accept the mystery of the incarnation of Christ in the Virgin Mary's most pure womb through the action of the Holy Spirit, not of a man, the argument of the average human height in those days has little value. The Word of God broke with the rules of human procreation and was able to choose a body fit for the mission he had to fulfill, revealing in his person God to mankind. Philip, whoever sees me sees the Father also. John chapter 14, verses 8 to 9. Teaching a religion at once new and difficult and showing everyone the way of salvation. All this implies a certain height that would enable him to make a better impression on the people of his time. 2. Some historians tell us that the length of the sacred Shroud of Turin, which is now 4.36 meters, or 14 feet 3.6 inches, must have been greater originally, perhaps 5 meters, or 16 feet 5 inches. Accordingly, to wrap up Jesus' body, Joseph of Arimathea bought about 5 meters of valuable linen. Wouldn't this have been a bit too much for a man measuring 1.62 meters, or 5 foot 3.8, when about 3.5 meters, or 11 feet 6 inches, would have been enough? The excessive length would confirm the conclusions reached by the aforesaid scholars, that Jesus would have been about 1.8 meters tall, 5 foot 10.9 inches, as it is, with Jesus' body stretched out on one half of the shroud and the other half folded back on him. Each half would have had about 60 centimeters, or 2 feet, left over to wrap around his feet, figure 49. Had Jesus been only 1.62 meters tall, or 5 foot 3.8 inches, about 80 centimeters, or 2 feet 7 inches, would have been left over for each half. That would have been too much. Joseph of Arimathea made a good estimate. A unique confirmation of Jesus' tallness is found in Rome, in the cloister of the Basilica of St. John Lateran. It consists in a marble slab supported by 4 small pillars. According to a tradition that may predate AD 1000, the slab's height would have corresponded to Jesus' height of 1.83 meters high, or 6 feet. This memento is precisely called the height of Christ, figure 54. At this point, I will quote Dr. Judica Cordelia. After setting out the anthropometric data of the man of the shroud, the expert concluded, all the ratios then point to normotypical, as they indicate above average bodily mass. The Christ of the shroud, therefore, can be classified among the normotypes, as can easily be verified. This classification is the same as that upheld by Gedda. In an overall view of all the data set out previously, we can see an anthropometrically perfect, extraordinary man, in all his impressive handsomeness, a handsomeness that shines through the soft lines of his face, even though they have been altered by the numerous severe lesions marking it. Next to his physiognomical handsomeness, there is the handsomeness of bodily perfection, exceeding by +8 in the somatic mass the average man's proportion. The man that we can see is indeed tall, mesocephalic, with a large skull, a somewhat elongated face, a large and upright forehead, a straight nose, slightly turned at the bottom, with large, somewhat projecting cheekbones, harmonious in the lines of the trunk and limbs, and sculpturally well proportioned, both lengthways and widthwise, a normotype. A subject with such characteristics usually has swarthy skin and dark hair. If we bear in mind the unitary concept of the organism and the biological importance of psychism, and if on the basis of those data, even for the Christ of the Shroud, we agree with the various authors on a correlation between psychic and somatic characteristics, then we must see in him a psychically perfect individual, and this supposition becomes certainty if he has, as we believe he was, the Christ, if he was, as we believe he was, the Christ of the Gospel. Wasn't the Jesus presented to us by the evangelists in their writings like this? Moving on to describe Jesus' psychic structure as appears in the Gospel, Judica Cordelia calls it lucid and resolute, with a strong will, perfectly balanced in his divine and human actions. He calls Jesus the perfect man, with an altogether uncommon fascination, a man above everyone. The face of Jesus. This writer, having returned to the Catholic Church through the grace of merciful God, sought in vain in museums and art galleries a face of Christ that would satisfy his burning desire for the spiritual and the divine, his desire to find an expression of conquering, victorious, divine force that could fill his yearning soul with peace. He sought in vain. He admired various masterpieces by the most renowned masters. Although they were perfect and satisfying for those who seek art only, he did not find in them the spirit that he was looking for. They were portrayals of the individual artist's compatriots or contemporaries, portrayals more or less perfect depending on the individual painter's skill. He thought that all hopes were lost to find in this life a real portrait of the God-man. Years later, in an unforgettable moment, he found in his hands something that at once fascinated him, delighted him, and completely enthralled him. It was a photograph of the face of the man of the shroud, Dr. R. W. Hynek, L'aspetto fisico di Gesù, Studio Medico Religioso, Turin, LICE, 1951, page 10. The face of Jesus. We would look in vain for some allusion to Jesus' handsomeness in the Gospel. Only one sentence might hint at it. In St. Luke, and the child grew and waxed strong, full of wisdom, and the grace of God was in him. What the ancients thought of Jesus' handsomeness is shown in the apocryphal letter of Lentulus to the Roman Senate. This letter, which is also called Pilate's letter to Emperor Tiberius, is now quoted at length. A man of great power has appeared in our time, and is called Jesus Christ. He raises the dead and heals the sick of every kind. He calls himself prophet of the truth, and has disciples who say he is the Son of God. He is a man of really handsome and admirable looks, and inspires awe and love in all who meet him. His hair is the color of ripe hazelnuts. It is parted on the forehead, according to the Nazarene's custom, held back as far as the ears. Then it hangs, beautiful, shining, free, down to the shoulders. His face is without blemish or wrinkle, rosy and handsome to behold. His nose and mouth have no defects. His eyes are sometimes sky blue, and sometimes almost green, and stand out against the white of the eye. He has a short, thick beard, same color as his hair, and parted in the middle. His hands and feet are also well formed. When he rebukes, he inspires fear, but he is good and gentle, though serious. No one has seen him laugh, but he was often seen weeping. He is a man of few words and reserved in his speech. He is full of charm among the sons of men. Ancient Christian literature is unanimous in describing Jesus' heavenly handsomeness. St. John Chrysostom wrote, "Those who met him, looking at him, were full of sacred reverence, inspired by his splendid, divine looks." St. Thomas Aquinas' words on this topic are perhaps not as well known. Christ was given a handsomeness befitting his mission, and the enthusiasm that he had to arouse in hearts. He chose for himself a body and face proportionate to his goal, and perfect in every regard. His goal was to teach the nations and bring them to God, who had become their master. And who does not know what handsomeness is fittest means to inspire kindness and earn the listener's favor? Let me reread that sentence. And who does not know that handsomeness is the fittest means to inspire kindness and earn the listener's favor? Artists of all times have vied with each other to sketch both the divine and human aspects, the majesty and lovableness of Jesus' face. Nevertheless, none has ever produced a face like that of the Shroud. From behind Semitic features, divinity shines through. As a matter of fact, all scholars think that, more than any other portrait, the face of the man of the Shroud bears witness to what must have been the majestic handsomeness of Christ when he was among us. Professor Hynek wrote, "Christ was definitely a handsome, attractive man, because his face, though suffering and disfigured, still has so much fascination that we cannot wrench ourselves away from him and never have enough of admiring so much handsomeness and majesty." Elsewhere, Dr. Hynek wrote, "The greatest and most precious merit of a perfect portrait is not so much exact faithfulness to individual details as much as the expression of what remains hidden behind the outward appearance of the face, the heart of hearts of the depicted person, his soul." Now, we cannot imagine or conceive something that would be more striking, more fascinating than that profound spiritual force that shines out from the imprints of the mysterious face of the sacred Shroud. This face is the supreme expression of an unshakable peace, of spiritual balance, of a most refined nobleness, of a total spiritualization that makes it divinely sublime and majestic. This is the completely outstanding face, fascinating and conquering, the only one that goes beyond everything else. No other face can be compared to this one. Truly, it can be none other than the sacred face of the God-man. G. Henry is convinced that the face of the Shroud, though a portrait of the dead Christ, is full of life, a life quite unlike that which would animate a man's features. In his turn, Dr. Judica Cordelia wrote, "The Christ of the Shroud has some absolutely unusual elements that cause it to be classified above and outside of every ethnic type. Christ had to be like that, a man of vigorous and sturdy constitution, with majestic looks, and obviously handsome face. As, after all, we can see in ancient iconography, and as we know from both oral and written tradition." Dr. Hynek, speaking of Jesus' face as revealed on the Shroud, quoted the famous speaker Father Segneri, who called it a disfigurement that charms. With St. Jerome, St. Ambrose, St. John Chrysostom, and others, he emphatically declared, "A soul such as Christ had, the most beautiful of all souls, was reasonably owed the most handsome body." Father Segneri wondered, but if that is true, what kind of disfigurement is that we can see on him when we plainly look at the sacred Shroud? A natural, innate disfigurement of his very own? And he answered, No, my dear audience, believe me, that is our disfigurement. Don't you know well that Isaiah chapter 53 verse 6 clearly stated, "Posuit Dominus in eo iniquitatem omnium nostrum." The Lord has laid on him the iniquity of us all, and also "Langores nostros ipse tulit." He has borne our infirmities, Isaiah chapter 53 verse 4, and also "Dolores nostros ipse portavit." He carried our sorrows, Isaiah chapter 53 verse 4. And also with the most dreadful words the apostle said, "Pro nobis factus est maledictum." He was made a curse for us, Galatians chapter 3 verse 13. What great surprise will it be, therefore, if he finally seems so disfigured. They are dreadful, I don't deny it, those wounds that gouged his back so deeply. But mercy, because we were responsible for those wounds. They are most dreadful, those bruises that crushed his face. Most dreadful, those gashes that maimed his chest, that paleness, that gloom, those stains, those bruises, all of which so outraged his innocent flesh. They are most dreadful. Yes, most dreadful. But it is well known, as St. Jerome said in Isaiah chapter 53, Quod pro nostris debebamus celeribus sustinere, ille pro nobis est passus. What we had to undergo on account of our crimes is what he suffered for us. And to the question why Christ should have wanted to leave us his portrait as disfigured as appears on the shroud, he answers that he did so to show us how much he loved us. And now let us see how Maria Valtorta described the face and fascination of Jesus. The physical person and fascination of Jesus, according to Valtorta. I would come a second time to die, to save them from an even more atrocious death. But my Father will not allow it. My love would allow it, but my justice would not. He knows it would be useless. Therefore I will come only at the last hour. But woe unto those who in that hour will see me after choosing Lucifer as their Lord. There will be no need of weapons in my angel's hands to win the battle against the Antichrists. My glance will be enough. Jesus speaking to Maria Valtorta in I Quaderni del 43, page 84. See also The End Times is revealed to Maria Valtorta, pages 1 and 2. The physical person and fascination of Jesus according to Maria Valtorta. And I will stop after that. I would like to state first, to have an accurate idea of Jesus' personality as seen by Maria Valtorta, one needs to read her entire The Poem of the Man God. It would not be enough to merely skim through. The face of Jesus, hair parted in the middle of the head and hanging down in long locks as far as the shoulders, wavy for a whole span, then ending in real curls, glossy, fine, very neat, bright blonde, with a definite shade of copper, especially in the final curls. Forehead very high, very handsome, smooth as the side of a violin. Temples slightly concave. On them, light blue veins cause faint traces of indigo showing through the whitest skin, that special white of some red blonde individuals, a milk white with a shade barely verging on ivory, but with an ever so slight touch of light blue, a very delicate skin that looks like petals of white carmelia, and so fine that the smallest veinlet shows through, and so sensitive that every emotion is sketched with greater paleness or bright flushes. Nose long and straight, with barely a light curve at the top. Near the eyes, a very handsome nose, thin and well-shaped. Eyes deep set, very beautiful, of the color of very dark sapphires, as I have so often described. Eyebrows and eyelashes thick, but not too much. Long, handsome, glossy, of the color of dark chestnuts, but with a microscopic spark of gold at the end of every small hair. Mouth symmetrical, somewhat small, well-shaped, very similar to the mother's mouth. Lips just the right thickness, neither too thin so as to look serpentine, nor too prominent in the middle. They are rounded, nor too prominent. In the middle they are rounded and strong in a beautiful curve. On the sides they almost fade away, making the mouth appear smaller than it is. Mouth very beautiful, a healthy red, opens on regular, strong dentition with rather long, very white teeth. Cheeks thin but not skinny, a white, narrow, long oval, but very handsome, with cheekbones neither too prominent nor too receding. The beard, thick on the chin and divided in two curly points, surrounds the mouth as far up as the lower lip, but it does not cover it. It grows shorter as it climbs towards the cheeks. On a level with the mouth corners, it becomes short, short being no more than a shadow, a dusting of copper against the pale cheeks, Where thick, it is dark copper, a dark blonde red. Same with the mustache, not very thick, kept short, so that it hardly covers the upper lip between the nose and the lip and ends by the corners of the mouth. Ears small, well shaped, joined closely to the head. They do not protrude at all. The fascination of Jesus. It really seems that wherever his blue eyes turn to, a veil of awe-inspiring yet happy peace is extended. Purity and peace flow out of his pupils, as wisdom out of his mouth, and love out of his heart. A place before Jesus' coming can be a common place, or a place of hustle and bustle that excludes peace, since peace presupposes the lack of work-related agitation. But as soon as he presents himself, that same place is uplifted, and work itself takes on some orderliness that does not exclude the presence of supernatural thinking, fused to manual work. I do not know if I am making myself clear. Jesus is never sullen, not even at times of greatest disgust for something that befalls him. He is always majestically dignified and passes on his supernatural dignity to whatever place in which he acts. Jesus is never a jolly fellow or a whiner, with his face torn open with laughter, or a hypochondriac, not even at times of greatest joy or greatest distress. His smile is inimitable. No painter could ever reproduce it. It seems to be a light that issues from his heart, a bright light at times of greatest joy, as for a soul that is being redeemed, or some other one that draws near to perfection. He has what I would call a rosy smile when he approves of his friends or disciples' spontaneous actions and enjoys their closeness, or, to stick to colors, a blue, angelic smile when he bends over children to listen to them, teach them, or bless them, a smile softened with compassion when he looks at someone distressed in body or soul, at last a divine smile when he speaks of his father or of his mother, or looks at and listens to his most pure mother. I cannot say I have seen him to be hypochondriac in times of greatest torment. I cannot say I have seen him to be hypochondriac in times of greatest torment. In the tortures of being betrayed, in the anguish of the sweat of blood, in the agony of the passion. Though sorrow wipes out the most delicate glitter of his smile, it is not enough to remove that peace that seems like a diadem of bright heavenly gems on his smooth forehead, that illuminates with its light his entire divine person. Likewise, I cannot say I have ever seen him indulging in unrestrained merriment. Not averse to a sincere laugh when called for, immediately after he regains his dignified serenity. But when he laughs, he looks wonderfully younger, so much that he takes on the face of a 20-year-old youth, and the world seems to look younger due to his beautiful, candid, resounding laugh. In the same way, I cannot say I have seen him doing things in a hurry. Whether speaking or moving, he always does it calmly, though never tardily or indifferently. Certainly, even in the way he moves about, he is gentlemanly and majestic. And his voice? Well, I've been hearing him speak for nearly 2 years, and yet sometimes I'm so absorbed in studying his voice that I almost lose the thread of what he's saying. And Jesus, good and patient, repeats what he said, looking at me with his good master's smile, so that the dictations should contain no mutilations due to my beatitude of listening to his voice, savoring it, and studying its tone and fascination. But after 2 years, I still cannot say precisely what tone it has. I definitely exclude the bass tone as I exclude that of lyric tenor, but I am still uncertain if it is a powerful tenor voice or that of a perfect baritone with an extremely broad vocal range. I would say that it is the latter, because his voice at times takes on some bronze notes which are so deep as to be almost muffled, especially when he speaks face to face with a sinner to bring him back to grace, or points out human strayings to the crowds. But when he analyzes and censures forbidden things and uncovers hypocrisy, the bronze becomes clearer, and it becomes harsh like thunderclap when he enforces truth and his will, and can even sing like a sheet of gold struck with a crystal hammer when it is uplifted to extol mercy or magnify God's works, or else it takes on this love tone color when he speaks to his mother or about her. Then his voice is really wrapped with love, a son's reverential love, and God's love in speaking highly of his greatest work. And he uses this tone, though less accentuated, to speak to his beloved ones, to converts, or to children, and his voice never weakens, not even during his longest discourses, because it is a voice that clothes and completes thought and speech, conveying their power or tenderness according to need.